Let's explore in a little more depth the process behind creating a virtual machine. So to do this, we're just going to start with a simple Windows Azure VM. Call this WinVM. And we've kind of looked at things like SSDs, HDDs, what the difference between the storage options are. We're going to choose an SSD in this case, our username and password. They've blocked the default administrator as the password. Just a resource group to hold it. And then we'll kind of get into some of the other choices you can make. The option you see here on bottom, Save Money, Microsoft offers a licensing program that allows you to transfer your Windows Server licenses from servers you have in your data center or office to VMs that reside in Azure. Now, if you choose to do that, you don't have to pay for the cost of the license of the operating system in your VM, so it does save you money. We're going to say no because we don't have that. The next thing we do is choose our size. Now, you can choose any size you want that's supported. The recommendations it's going to give you are some of the most common based on what your requirements for minimum CPU and memory are. Let's say I need a minimum of 8 CPUs and I need a minimum of 16 gigabytes of memory. Based on that, it'll give me some recommendations, or I can choose View All to see all available VM types. And so I'm going to choose a VM which is a DS4, 8 CPUs, 16 gigs of RAM. Estimated cost of $458 per month with upwards of 16 local data disks. And so now we get into our optional features. So the first thing is our availability set. Now we're going to cover availability sets in greater depth in a different demo, but this is where I would choose to either select or create my availability set. Now it's important to know that you only use an availability set when you have multiple VMs performing the same role at the same layer of an application. Any single VM that's contained within an availability set, the availability set at that stage serves no purpose. Availability sets ensure that if I have 3 VMs in the same set, that not all 3 VMs go down at the same time, and they're also placed on different physical hardware to help prevent downtime in the event of Azure maintenance or regular cycles or failure. We can choose to use managed or unmanaged disks. Choosing no means we have to now configure our own storage account. We're going to go with yes for the managed disks. Now we configure the networking. By default, it's going to give us names that the system generates that are just based on the name of the VM. So we're going to customize some of this. I'm going to call this one CloudNet. And I'm going to change the address space to 12.0.0.0/8. And the subnet to 12.0.1.0/16. Let's see what this error is. 12.1.0. There we go. So we'll just correct that IP address. So now we have essentially a Class A VNet, and then we have a Class B subnet on that VNet. Our subnet name is going to be front end, and we'll go ahead and click OK on that. So just customizing the IP configuration. What do we want to name the public IP address, and whether we want that to be static or dynamic. I'm going to make this one static. I'm just going to name it public IP. And then finally, the network security group. So right now, there's one existing network security group in my subscription. I'm going to create a new security group. Call this one WinVM-network security. And then add a number of inbound rules. So I'm going to add a rule that allows web access, so port 443, and I'm going to add a rule that allows remote management with PowerShell. So I'm going to add WinRM. We're not going to add any outbound rules. The default is all outbound traffic is allowed. And then we have the option to add some VM extensions. So we're going to add the extension for Microsoft Anti-Malware, which will simply enable antivirus inside this virtual machine. Don't need to configure any settings by default. We don't have any exclusions. We're just going to take the default settings for antivirus, which is a full scan on Saturday. Hit OK on that. And we've now added that extension to the VM. I am going to enable auto shutdown. I'm going to go with 7 o'clock p.m. Newfoundland time. And then we're going to enable both guest OS diagnostics and boot diagnostics. So what the auto shutdown will do is at that particular time, it will power off the VM. And this is simply a cost savings measure. If the Azure VM contains things like administrative tools, let's say this is a VM that has your tools you use every day, you don't want to leave it running overnight, this is a great way to ensure that you control cost by shutting that down every day. Now you can go further using Azure Automation and have it boot and shut down on a regular basis, but this type of auto shutdown at the end of the day is something that a lot of administrators really like. I personally really like it. Any VM that I have that is not a service that's being held or provided for someone else, that's just one I use for admin, for automation, for development purposes, I forget to shut it down 90% of the time, so the auto shutdown just prevents that additional cost. It shuts it down at the end of the day. Monitoring for boot diagnostics and guest OS diagnostics. If you're having trouble, if the VM is not booting, if it's having an issue, it will record things like screenshots, error logs, etc., just to give you access to that diagnostic information. And then that goes on its own dedicated storage account, which you can name anything you want, and you can configure any way you want. The default is typically fine for that. So we'll click OK, complete the deployment. Let Azure finish the validation and go ahead and click Create. And so that will now submit that VM, get it deployed for me, and we're basically done. So that's a look at, in more depth, at actually going through an Azure VM deployment and some of the available options. Final note, for Linux and Windows, everything is basically the same. There's no difference except the way the password is specified. All of the settings, the extensions will be a little bit different, obviously, because Windows-based extensions are available for Windows VMs. There are also extensions available for Linux VMs as well. But aside from that, all the other decision points around networking storage, they're all the same.